Well, hello, Kate. Thank you so much for being here today on my podcast.
Hi, Cheryl. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, Kate, you are an expert, in my opinion, of all things house sitting. And that's mainly why I want you to come on and really share all your expertise. But before we get to that, I always love to hear everybody's story of how they got hooked into travel. Like, what is your backstory on that? If you could share that with us.
Well, it's interesting. I've been thinking about this since you mentioned you might ask me this question. And I know that when I was a kid, I lived a very structured life, with school and all the planned activities and all of that. And when we would go on vacation, my parents and my sisters and I, it always felt like there were so many more possibilities of
Mm,
ways to live and things to do. I saw my parents kind of relax and
mm,
get outside of sort of the sort of structured mode. And so there was something always so appealing about it, whether we went in our RV to national parks. I remember the first time I took a flight was I don't know how old I was, maybe 10 or 11, and we
mhm.
went to Disneyland. We were living in Northern California. We flew down to LA to go to Disneyland. My parents took us on a cruise when I was in high school, maybe a junior in high school, and just all of those experiences just really made me feel like there were so many other possibilities of ways to live. And it was both that and reading for sure. I mean, I fell in love with Pippi Longstocking, and she was living by herself,
So did
on this.
I.
Oh, yay, Pippi! We all love Pippi. And so there was something so freeing about that. I loved Harriet the Spy. That Harriet would get on her bike and just had this freedom to ride her bicycle all over Manhattan. So there's always been something about wandering and
Mhm,
exploring that has
mhm.
always deeply appealed to me as a person who's always curious about how people live. What do people do with their living time?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, mine goes back to my childhood too, I think. But yeah, it's just like I
Did you
think you
travel a lot as a kid?
I just recall one we did, but not outside the US. But I do recall, like you said, you had an RV trip. We had a summer RV trip that our family took. It was like 5 weeks and we hit like all these national parks and it just I don't know, fond memories, like you said, that wondering, that just, not having a schedule and just exploring things was just so, just enticing for me. And I enjoyed it like you did. Yeah.
Feels so freeing, doesn't it?
Yes,
It,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think, as I got older, I wanted to recapture that. So have done some travel, as I'm sure you have too. So you've done some solo travel, but I think right now you travel a lot with your husband and you do some house sitting. So share with us like how you got into that house sitting and how that all came about for you.
Sure. Well, about 11 or 12 years ago, actually, I took an early retirement from the university where I was teaching in California, and my husband was already retired. And we just actually, for a year, lived without a house and just
Nice.
traveled. And we got this idea in a variety of ways. I actually write about it in my first memoir, which is called Call It Wonder, why we took that leap.
Okay.
There's a lot to say about that. But for a whole year, we would stay with friends. We actually had friends in Australia and India who said, "Come and visit," and we said, "Are you sure you mean it? Because we will," and we did. And we also traveled a lot in the States. We rented a lot of Airbnbs, and we're just sort of living like that as a sort of an experiment for a year.
Hmm.
But then someone we knew invited us to house sit for them in the Santa Cruz Mountains, which had actually been where we'd been from, and we needed to go back there to do some medical stuff. So he asked us if we would just stay in his place for a couple of weeks. And I wasn't even thinking about it as house sitting at the time. I was just thinking, oh,
Yeah.
cool, we have a free place to stay.
Yeah.
Well, we hadn't got to ask a lot of questions. We're just like, cool, we'll come and stay in your place. We didn't really know him that well. And it turned out he had a little small farm.
Oh.
I mean, it was a house in the mountains, and that he had a few ducks and chickens, but it was actually 40 uh, ducks, chickens, rabbits, geese, and a cat. It was a beautiful spot with a gorgeous garden. And we, at first, though, were very overwhelmed. Because Dave had to get up at 6. Of course, I say Dave had to do this. Dave had to get up at 6 in the morning and go feed all those animals. And when we realized that was what we were going to be doing every morning, we thought, oh my God. Also, as I write about in my second book, second memoir, Wanderland, which is really about house sitting, I write about how when we first showed up, because it was a farm and he had the windows open in the summer, there were flies buzzing all around the
Oh
house. And
gosh.
he had been trying to hold it together while his wife and kids had already taken off on their trip. And so he just had a lot going on. So
Mm-hmm.
when he left, we closed the windows, killed all the flies. And then I started focusing on what was amazing about this experience, which were a couple things. One of them was the location, beautiful mountains, trees, gorgeous property, but also they had this incredible garden. And I just
Mm.
started like pulling all the vegetables and the fruit from the trees and cooking. And I kind of became the farmer's wife, and Dave became the farmer, and taking care of the animals. And suddenly I was like, wow, we're sort of living this other life. This is really interesting. And by the time it came time to leave, I'd actually fallen in love with the place and was sort of sad to leave. But what happened during that time, because I think I was open to this, it came across somehow on the internet that, wow, there are actually websites that
Mm-hmm.
people sign up for where they house sit for other
Yep.
people. And I thought, and this was over 10 years ago. Now a lot of people know about this, but back then not as
Yeah.
many did. And so I said, wait a minute, we could, this could be a game changer, because we knew at this point that our year experiment was something we wanted to extend. But
Mm-hmm.
wow, if we could stay in all these places for free in actual neighborhoods and have this experience of living other lives like we just had right there, that might be really cool. So I signed up for 2 platforms,
Uh-huh.
and right away we got a house sit up in Washington State. And we went and we did it, and that was the start. And so I'd say in the last decade, we've probably done about 80 house sits all over the world.
Wow. Wow. And that first one, was that your first experience like tending to those kind of animals and doing that kind of stuff? Was it?
Well, I grew up in a kind of a rural area. I
Okay.
belonged to 4-H. I had 2 show ducks, and my sister had some chickens. So I bet I'd never been around that many before. Dave hadn't really either, to my
Okay.
knowledge. And so yeah, it was sort of learning on the fly. The owner didn't seem too worried about it. He was
Okay.
just like, okay, here's how you handle it, and here's how you feed them, here's what you do. And so yeah, it was a swift learning curve, but there was a
Yeah.
certain amount of comfort with it for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Because, like, I don't know that I would have felt, because I don't have that kind of experience. Cats and dogs, maybe birds and like other small critters, but I don't know that I would be able to. I mean, but that's interesting. You had that background, and you felt more comfortable, obviously, with that kind of
Right.
situation. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
And obviously with house sitting, you can, on all these different platforms, you can only apply to ones that you're comfortable with. For example, I know a woman that is not too into dogs and loves cats, so she pretty
yeah,
much only applies for cat sits.
cat sits. Yeah. 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 I've seen all kinds, horses, birds,
We took
reptiles.
care of
Oh,
it. We took care of a tortoise named Roberto once,
oh,
who
really?
actually lived in the closet in the house, which was really
No
unusual.
way.
We had to bring him, he was heavy. We had to bring him
Yeah.
outside once a day to get some sun and feed him
Uh-huh.
out there, and then let him go back in his favorite spot in the house.
Any other crazy animals that you have to watch?
I think that was probably one of the craziest. I know people that have done snakes and so forth. It's not
Yeah.
really my
Yeah.
my bag, but I do I do remember. we did a house sit actually in Utah for 2 months, one winter, which was really great because we love
Oh,
to
yeah.
ski. And so we were able to ski for a couple of months. And we had two chickens and a rabbit.
Okay.
And what was the rabbit lived indoors in a cage.
Yeah.
And she said, "Oh,
Yeah.
you can let the rabbit out once in a while." And it was just sort of a pooping machine. I think that's what rabbits are.
Yes.
It was
That's
so
all they
cute, but it didn't want to be touched. It didn't want to be cuddled. So I was like, oh.
Oh, okay.
But it was great because those are sort of low maintenance
Yeah.
animals, and we didn't feel
Yeah.
guilty about going and skiing all day
Going
long.
skiing. Yes. Yes. Well, 80 places and all across the globe. We know that accommodations can really take up a big chunk of, your finances or your budget for travel. And so, of course, I don't know what the stats are. I don't know. I'd say, would you say it's like 30% of your budget, maybe? Accommodations.
Probably
It
more.
probably
Of course,
depends on where you're going, as we know, right?
exactly. And
Yeah,
what your standards are.
correct. Yeah, well, there you go. Right, what your standards are. Good. So what would you recommend? I know it's probably in one of your books, which we'll at the end we'll go ahead and let you just list all those books and where we can find them because I'm sure it has a lot more detail than we'll be able to get into today. But what advice would you give to someone on, just starting? How should they start house sitting?
Mhm. Right. Well, I think the best advice around that is to start applying for house sits where you live
Hmm.
because um, you will be local. So they'll be more interested in you because then maybe they'd even get a chance to meet you
Yeah.
before they asked you to do it. They know that you're nearby, so it'd be less likely that you would cancel.
Hmm.
And also, the shorter sits are a lot less competitive. People tend to like the longer sits,
Oh,
6 weeks,
okay.
8 weeks, 2 months, and so, if even if you're working, it'd be cool, oh, let's say I live in the Silicon Valley in California. Oh, well, look, I live in, let's say, San Jose, California, which is about an hour outside of San Francisco. Oh, look, there's a weekend house sit in San Francisco. Maybe I'll apply for that. I'll go spend the weekend in San
Yeah.
Francisco. And
Okay.
it's just like 2 or 3 days.
Uh-huh.
And so that way you automatically start building the all important reviews, right? You want
Yeah.
really good reviews.
Yes.
And so if you've done 2, 3, 4, 5, and you have, these 5-star reviews that are all local, short sits, then you can start applying, being more competitive for the ones that are longer, that are
Hmm.
international, and kind of the more, the places that appeal to people, to a lot
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great advice. I started doing that, just doing local because I'm prepping for, some international. So I wanted to get those reviews, right? So, but
Great.
I like the advice of looking at the shorter sits. I hadn't really considered that because you're right. It does seem like there's more applications for some of those longer stays. So there's like more competition, as you mentioned, for those longer stays. So that's great advice. I love that.
Let
Would
me
you
just say
say?
one more thing.
Yeah,
I can just say
absolutely.
one more thing about that, which is even the shorter ones internationally, are less competitive. So
Okay.
we just have this whole thing set up where we're going to Europe doing a bunch of house sitting starting this fall, and we got a three night house sit in London. We just get off the plane and boom, 3 nights in London.
Awesome.
But a lot of times the London ones are, snapped up
Yeah,
pretty quickly.
I'm
But
sure.
because this one was only 3 nights, there was not as much competition. I thought, well, this is better than staying a couple of nights in a
A
hotel when we
hotel.
first.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. Really good advice. Now, I know you are doing this currently with your husband, but is house sitting something that you would recommend for a female solo traveler? Do you feel like it's a safe option for them?
Absolutely. In fact, I know I'm connected with a lot of nomads, however they
Yeah.
describe themselves, whether they're digital nomads or retired or whatever it is. And many of them are single women who do this all over the world. One of the really great things about it is obviously there's a platform. People have to pay to get onto the platform.
Hmm.
Of course, they don't pay when you get a house that people don't pay you to sit or you don't pay them,
Right.
that's what I really actually very much like that, because it's more of like an equitable relationship.
Yes.
It's a give and take. But to get on the platform, you have to pay.
Hmm.
And then clearly, not only do the sitters get reviews, but the homeowners get reviews as well. So you can, as a single woman, go through and see what other people have said about it. You can look and see if there have been any other single women that have house sat for these people.
Hmm.
Sometimes people specifically request a single woman, like say for, I've seen that numerous times, because
Yes, I
they
have
say, for
too.
example,
Hmm.
I have a small bed because I live alone, or
Hmm.
maybe it's if it's a couple, they might say, our dog doesn't really like strange men. It
Yeah.
only likes women, so there
Yeah.
might be things like that. So again, I know a number of women that do this. I also know couples, straight couples, when I'm specifically talking about, but lesbian couples as well, who do a lot of this traveling. And then they're like, oh, we feel like spending some time apart. So they might
Oh,
take separate house sits,
okay.
or one will stay at home and the
Yeah.
other one will go out and do a sit solo.
Okay.
So, and the reason, yeah. So, and those are again, women doing it by themselves. So I know couples that spend all their time together, and especially nomads, and they feel like they need to take a break from each other sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that makes
they do it
sense
separately.
because you're,
Mhm.
when you're nomads, you don't go to an office to work, or you don't like, I mean, and if you're working digitally, you're working in the house or wherever you're staying. I get that needing to like bring me back to 2020 and COVID. And I felt the same way. Just, I was still married at the time and just feeling like I needed to like, I need to work outside that, just getting out, I understand that, just needing some of that alone time. So that's, I've never heard of that, but that makes sense. Totally makes sense. Right.
Right. I think it's a great, yeah, yeah, no, I think it's a great move for people to, yeah, just to keep things, to just, provide a little space. Sometimes
Yeah,
that's important.
absolutely. Now, not that we're affiliates, but I know of Trusted House Sitters. You mentioned two platforms. What is the other one that you have used?
Yeah, there's actually multiple ones that I've used.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I've definitely used Trusted House Sitters a lot. I've used one called House Sitters America when I was traveling,
In
mostly in the
America.
States.
Okay.
Um, I've used House Sit Mexico,
Okay.
which was specifically looking for house sitting in Mexico. Um, I belong to another one. Oh, what is the name of it? I have them all listed actually in the back of my book.
Okay.
Uh, and then there's other places you can find it too. But yeah, I belong to one right now, two right now that have a little bit more going on in Europe. And
Okay.
so I actually belong to multiple ones,
All right.
depending on what my specific needs are at a particular time. So they all have advantages and disadvantages. I mean, clearly Trusted House Sitters is the largest platform right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, However, it's much more competitive. And
Yeah.
so sometimes if you belong to some of the others, your chances maybe of getting a sit might be a little bit better. The other thing about Trusted House Sitters, as good as it's been to us, they made a rule change, I think last year, where they as many people as wanted could apply for the house sit, and until the homeowner cut it off. Now they
Oh.
only receive 5 applications. This is really important for sitters to realize, because you'll
Oh.
say a lot of times you'll see these super popular ones come up,
Mm-hmm.
and by the time you click on it, it's gone. It'll
Yeah.
say reviewing. Well,
Yeah.
that's not the homeowner doing that. That's Trusted House Sitter that cuts it off after 5 applications. So the
Wow.
homeowner then has to look at those 5, and if they're not happy with any of those 5, they can reject them all and then repost it. So sometimes when you see a great sit and it disappears, sometimes it will reappear, and that's
Oh,
why.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I wasn't aware of that, that new rule. So that I guess kind of makes sense. But yeah, so I had heard you have to jump on like when you see a new, like a brand new posting, a house sit to like apply right away if you're interested because, and I wasn't aware it was because they kind of cut it off after, 5 applicants. So thank you for sharing that detailed
Sure.
information. Yeah, I was not aware of that. And the other places you mentioned, I see them being more beneficial because they seem to be more location specific. Like you said, you had the house at Mexico, which would just be in Mexico and such. It would make sense that those are less inundated like trusted house sitters, like with
Exactly.
applicants. So yeah.
Oh, the other one, I just remember the name of it that we belong to, is called, well, there's two, House Match, and
Okay.
there's another one called House Carers, Carers. That one has a lot of European ones in it. So, but again, there are still more. I think there are probably at least 15 or 20 platforms out there, but we do have other ways we get house sits other
Oh,
than,
okay. How do you do
would
that?
you
Share that
like
with
to hear
us.
about those?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, one of the ways is if we know we have a specific region we're interested in, oftentimes there will be a Facebook page that focuses on that region.
Yeah.
Sometimes that Facebook page specifically is targeted toward house sitting. Other
Hmm.
times it's just sort of like, oh, expats
Yeah.
and, information and all this. So if it's specifically targeted toward house sitting, then it's kind of obvious. You can uh, scroll through it, look at it, see what's available, post about yourself on there. Or if it's not, you can still, some people, so this is how we got one house sit in Hawaii. We had gotten a two-month house sit on the Big Island, and we
Wow.
wanted to get a house sit on Maui. So I posted some information about Dave and me with our reviews, a link to our trusted house sitters, and I basically said, anybody going anywhere if you want somebody to come and take care of your pets? Sure enough, somebody contacted us, and we got a month-long house sit on Maui taking care of 3 cats.
Wow.
And so that you have to be a little more careful though, because obviously that's not vetted in the way the
Mm.
websites are vetted, and people don't have to pay for it. So I would always recommend, if someone says they want you, to insist on a video call,
Okay.
talk to them, meet
Hmm.
them, ask them to show you around the house during the video call without any like advance warning, because that way it'll be really clear to you kind of what the
Yes.
condition of the place is. A lot of times you can meet the animals on there on the video call. So I've actually had people automatically approve us on trusted house sitters because they saw we had all these great reviews, and what I do, and they so I get an invitation
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh, you are invited to do this sit. And I always contact them. I said, oh, how great. Thank you. And I want to meet you before I approve it.
Hmm.
I never approve without meeting people, whether it's on a platform or on Facebook. Um,
Good
and there is
advice.
one other
Yes.
way that we get sits, which is, well, two other ways. One is sometimes I just post on social media that Dave and I are going to be in this region. We're available. We've had, through friends and friends of friends, gotten sits that way.
Yeah.
And then we also belong to kind of two exclusive groups of vetted, experienced house sitters,
Mm.
where we give our, if somebody has offered us a sit that we can't take, then we'll refer it to the rest of the group.
Oh, okay.
And how we got into that was just really connecting, with other nomads and house sitters. And that's obviously an experience online, joining a variety of groups. There's different groups for nomads and travelers,
Yeah.
especially. There's a lot. I'm sure you belong to some that
Yes, I
are
do.
for women travelers. Yeah.
Yes,
So
there's
I
lots.
think
Yes.
yeah. So once you make those connections, a lot of times you'll be invited into things like that.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. Well, that's super advice. I love the video call idea. I mean, because I've done some house sits local, which I've had a chance to actually meet. I can go to their house and meet them beforehand, meet the pet, make sure, we gel and we connect. But the video thing, yeah, when you're talking about distance and yeah, you just can't be, I mean, that would just make me feel safer, just kind of knowing what I'd be walking into. I love it. Thank you.
Yes, and I would recommend being really clear about some questions that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it as a mutual meeting, a
Mm-hmm.
mutual interview, where you ask specific questions. And so in Wanderland, I talk about how we began to understand as we did more sits that, oh, this is a question we should ask. This is a question we should ask. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
kind of an extreme example. We were doing a house sit in Chicago, and the dog was hiding under the bed, and I wanted to get him out from under the bed. So I put a treat under there, and he
Mhm.
actually bit my finger. And that was the only time I've been bitten by an animal on a house sit. I mean, I bled, but he didn't
Thank,
chomp my finger off,
thank
thank goodness.
goodness.
But it was, it was kind of traumatic. I thought, oh my
Yeah.
God, this dog bit me. I feel terrible about that. So I contacted the homeowner and said, oh yeah, he's done that to me before. And I said, oh, okay, I need to ask that
Yeah.
question, not just assume people are going to tell me that. And not only that, do I need to say, has your dog ever bitten you or anybody else? A
Yeah.
lot of times people say no, and then I'll say, has your dog ever nipped anybody
Nipped.
else?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's hard for dog owners, I understand, to not,
Yes.
to acknowledge. And a lot of times say, well, it is a border collie, he will nip sometimes. And then I say, okay, what do you do when that happens?
Yeah.
So that there's some kind of
Yeah.
understanding of, yeah, honestly, I feel like I could handle anything. I just need the information.
Yes. I agree. That's a great question to ask because you don't want to be caught in where, especially if you're in another country and they actually do injure you, that you have to go get medical care. I mean, and not knowing that ahead of time. Yeah, that could be turned into a little bit of a mess. That's
It
a great
could,
question
but
to ask.
again, yeah, I don't want to make it sound like that's something common. Like I said, we've been with so many animals, and this dog, he was reactive, feeling, kind of pushed, and I felt fine with him afterwards. Continued to
Good.
work with
Good.
him, just knew that I couldn't corner him,
Yeah.
and it wasn't that big of a deal. But some people wouldn't be comfortable with that at all. So you just need to
Right.
make sure you ask questions around your needs and your comfort.
What has been outside of maybe that example? What has been your most challenging house sit that you've had to do?
Well, actually, this is another good example of one where we didn't ask the right questions. Part of it was because we actually got this house sit through a Facebook site that was about Panama. So
Okay.
I had posted that we already had one house sit in Panama that we'd gotten through trusted house sitters, and we wanted to see another part of Panama. So I posted on the Bocas del Toro site. Bocas del Toro is this incredible area that has beautiful islands and water. It's just gorgeous. So we wanted to see it. So I just posted on the Bocas del Toro site, hey, anybody happen to need a house sitter during this month? Because this is
Yeah.
when we're available. And I received a message right away from a really awesome couple. I want to make that clear. They're a really great couple. They said, yeah, we actually need you that whole month. Would you be willing to do it with our two dogs? And we said, yes, of course. Well, we were so excited about it. I didn't really get important information, which is that, of course, Panama is very hot. And this couple, they are comfortable living a kind of Swiss Family Robinson lifestyle. And they not only don't have air conditioning because it's off grid, but there were no ceiling fans. So it
Oh,
was really, really hot and miserable. That said, it was probably in some other ways one of the most wonderful and amazing house sits, even though I was
okay.
physically uncomfortable a
Is
lot
it?
of the time. We, first of all, the couple was really great. When we showed up that night,
Mhm.
they took us out to dinner with 10 of
Oh,
their friends.
oh,
And we met
wonderful.
these wonderful people. This often happens actually, where we show up early and people introduce us to
Yeah.
their neighbors and friends. But this one was like, we're having a party, Kate and Dave are here. And so we had made a really great connection with people that we ended up spending time with, that took us places on their
Oh,
boats, and also just being there was pretty amazing. It's like I said, it's just really a stunning location. Um, but it was hard to sleep at night.
oh, I bet. Oh my gosh. That reminds me of I did the same thing. Well, we did an Airbnb in Belize, and it had ceiling fans. And I also thought, oh, it's April. It's not going to be that hot. And I kind of knew it didn't have air conditioning, or I just ignored that it didn't have air conditioning. It was so hot. And I mean, it got really uncomfortable to sleep. I understand that. And yeah, so asking the right questions, there you go. right?
Exactly.
What has been your all-time favorite house sit and where was it?
God, that's such a hard one to
I know,
answer
I know.
because each one has just incredible advantages and is always an incredible learning experience and just an amazing experience. But when you said that, I think the first thing that popped into my mind truly was we've done 2 long house sits on the Big Island of Hawaii. And I adore Hawaii. And in both cases, we had a car we could use, and that's a whole other thing
Oh,
that could be a really nice
yeah,
component of a house. A lot of times they will give you let you use their car. So we had a
sure.
car we could use so we could see the island. We in both cases had a dog that I just really fell in love with. Both of them were sort of off British, well, one more so than the other. But we showed up on one of the 3-month one 2 days early and just totally hit it off with the couple. They're now friends. They've actually moved from Hawaii and we're still friends. And I would love to see them again.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and they introduced me to, again, their neighbors. In fact, how it happened is in the morning, the first morning, Jamie, the homeowner Jamie said to me, "Hey, Kate, I go on walks in the morning with my girlfriends. Do you want to come with me?" I said, "Heck yeah." So that morning we went on a walk in the neighborhood with her friends. And then once Jamie left, I became Jamie and just continued walking with her
Walking with
friends,
them.
connected
Oh,
with them. Ended up, I like to play the ukulele, and a couple of them play the ukulele. So we'd get together and play the ukulele. One of them was working on a book and had me help her with her book because I'm a
because
book
you're a
editor
writer.
also.
Yeah, yeah.
And at 76 years old, her book got published by a university press
Oh,
because I had been
awesome.
there to help her at that moment. I mean, it probably would have anyway. It was really great writing, but I was just honored to be part of that process. So there was so much that came out of it,
Hmm.
in addition, of course, to being
To
in
the beauty
Hawaii.
of it, but
Yeah.
the whole outside of that, the experience sounds like it was amazing. Like I think that's part of the charm, at least for me, when people travel, is that making those connections and, finding community, especially if you slow travel, right? Like, which is what you're doing when you're doing house sits, essentially, is you're taking the time to really get involved in the community, make those connections. And so that sounds like, well, I mean, who can complain about Hawaii in itself, but
Right.
the all over experience seems like it was just like you felt home, maybe like you felt like you were home.
It did.
Yeah,
And it's so funny. A lot of times when it comes time to leave, I get this feeling of like, oh, wait a minute. This isn't
my
my
home.
house. Wow. And so there's part of me that's a little clingy and sometimes it gets a little sad about that. But then there's also part of me that's excited, for the next thing. But I just guess I want to emphasize that I think that's one reason why it's so great for solo travelers is
Mm,
because there can be a loneliness component of it, but you show up, you meet people right away, and there you are living in a neighborhood. You're not sequestered in some
right.
hotel room
Yeah.
or Airbnb, but you're in an
Yes.
actual neighborhood.
Hmm.
Maybe out walking the dog and you meet people, or
That's
oh, here's
true.
our favorite cafe. And so, yeah, I think it's great for solos because of that.
Yes, I would totally agree. I mean, I'm actually on a house sit right now with the dog, and I just met a whole bunch of neighbors walking the dog. I mean, like, it's
Right on.
it's a suburban neighborhood, but I mean, very friendly. So I get that. It's gosh, I'd move in this neighborhood if I could, right? So
Exactly.
yes,
Yeah, it's really
that's
fun to
great.
try on all these different lives.
I like that idea too. I think, and even as you said, your first year, you guys were kind of testing this out. I think it's a great way for others who are considering, maybe this whole nomadic lifestyle to test it out. Do some house sits and see if you like that lifestyle before you fully commit. Because it is a lifestyle change and it's not for everybody. But there's I've interviewed my last person that I interviewed, she has found it is her lifestyle. Like she doesn't see herself ever going back to owning a home or anything permanent like that. So
Mm,
definitely something to try out, I think, as a traveler. So share,
absolutely.
yeah. So you've written, I think 8 books. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Yeah. So tell
Yeah.
us, I guess just maybe tell us quickly the names of them and then where can we find those books? Because it sounds like it has tons of resources and information that we just maybe touched the surface of. So what are those names?
Yes. Well, I've been a writer my whole life. So the other books I've written a few novels,
Okay.
collections of poems, and two memoirs. But I think for this, let me just and
Yeah.
people can find out all that information on my website. You can go right to
Yes.
my website to see all my books, which is kateevanswriter.com. That's my website. But let me just tell everybody about this one. Well, you
Yes. That's the
backwards
one
here, but
I'm
it's
in. Yeah.
called Wanderland, living the traveling life. And this one is mainly about house sitting. And actually in the back, I have a bunch of tips. So it's sort of like it's the stories and the cumulative stories you see how I learn or we learn as we go along. And then at the end is all the information about, kind of what we've learned over
Yeah.
time.
Okay. The
Yeah.
platforms, the resources. That sounds amazing. Yes.
Exactly. And
I will make
I even give an example of an application. So like how to write an application for a sit if you really want it. I talk about why to specifically, for example, mention the name of the animals, because what's most important to people is
mm,
not really taking care of their house, which is part of it, but it's mostly about taking care of their animals. So just show
yes.
them how much you love and care about animals. And there's a lot of ways to do that in the letter.
Okay. I love it. I'm definitely going to pick one up because I think I need to
Yay.
fix up my application. Oh, well, this has been so informational, even for me, but I hope also for my listeners. And you've great examples. I love the resources and everything we've talked about. You've been so wonderful. And I'll make sure I include all like your website you just mentioned, any other links we will include in the show notes for people to click on and find you and get your books. Um, any other last words of wisdom you want to give any kind of solo female travelers that you would say?
Yeah, you know why I titled the book Wanderland. It's not Wonderland like Alice in Wonderland, it's Wanderland. And
Hmm.
I just think if this is a fit for people, just to think about it as both wandering and wondering. I think that there's um sometimes I know I get kind of like wrapped up in, okay, I'm going from point A to point B and da 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 da, and then, but the actual experience itself, just it opens up your life to wonder
Hmm.
about the places you were wandering. It's really coming from the heart as opposed to always the head when it comes to traveling. I mean, they're obviously both important, but sometimes I just love the feeling of imagining what the possibilities are. It
Yes.
it just lights me up. So I that's one reason why I'm kind of a I like to encourage people to kind of step outside,
Hmm.
the box a little bit
Yep.
and into what I call the fertile void. Because, when you step
Ah,
off into this sense of, oh, what's going to happen? It's fertile. There's always something interesting that can occur and that will occur. So,
I love
yeah,
that. Yes, it's true.
like to encourage,
And it's going to be different for
all
everybody,
travel.
right? All right. Well, Kate, thank you again. It's been
Thank
a
you so much.
joy. And again, we're
Appreciate
going to
it.
put all those links, especially for your website and anything else, so that people can get your books and wonder in their travels,
Thank you.
right? I love it. Thank you
Thank you
again.
so much.
All right.
Appreciate you. All right.
Bye
Bye.
bye.